Okay, let's get started. Today I have a lot of things to cover, and I really want to get through a whole presentation this week, unlike most weeks. And I know everybody expects me to say I'm going to do something in the middle of the week, and it never happens. And please don't judge me for that. I do work a full-time job in a law firm, and I've got a rather big case I'm filing tomorrow. So I'm going to be tied up on that since it's a temporary restraining order, but that will also help give me a little bit of credibility, I think, for the fact that when I talk about the Hawaii decision and a little bit the Maryland decision this week on TROs, I know what I'm talking about because I've done probably close to a couple hundred of those in my career. So I do know how those things work. And I can tell you right now that things aren't working very well. So today, one of the things I do as a lawyer is I take things and I take massive piles of evidence. I've had cases where there have been 40 million pages of documents that had to be gone through, it's impossible. You have to kind of figure a way to review that. But you take something from here and you connect it to here to establish your point. You make these connections. And what I'm telling you right now is, in terms of things that relate to Bible prophecy, everything is connected right now. It's like a giant spider web. And so that's why I'm calling it webs of lies and ties today, because it's all tied together, but a lot of it is based on lies of the enemy, that things are going to get better. So we talk about the convergence. These things are all interconnected now in a way that I don't think they've ever been in human history, except for maybe one time. And hopefully, if I get to the end of this today, I will tie that up for you. I used this last week. The world is like a giant chessboard, and the pieces have all been knocked into a big pile, and it's all very confusing. Talking about confusion, here's a picture of a guy walking around. He's got the warning color top and camouflage pants. And so this is a man who's massively confused. Do you want to be seen or not? I mean, make up your mind. And this is typical. This would be the typical postmodern confusion that exists in so many people in our world right now. Just a public service announcement. Trevor Loudon has done a great video and a lot of great work. His most recent work is The Enemies Within, showing how people have infiltrated our government with agendas and orientations that are not consistent with American constitutional values. He'll be speaking in Ohio starting tomorrow night, usually put on by ACT for America. I think tomorrow night he's up in Mansfield. You can go to the Act for America websites. He'll be in Mansfield tomorrow night, then he'll be in Cleveland, I think, on Tuesday, Columbus Wednesday night. You can go to Act for America. I think it's Act for America Central Ohio, Act for America Columbus, or something like that. They have an Eventbrite place where you can register. I don't off the top of my head remember. I'll try to send out an email to the people in the church here, or I'll post something on my Facebook page. That'll probably be the way to reach most people. And then he'll be in Cincinnati on Thursday night. The cost in most cases is a $5 donation to attend, and some require you to register in advance. And I would highly recommend that you take advantage of this opportunity to see Trevor Loudon in person. He'll also be signing some books and that sort of thing. The operative verse that I want to refer to today is one that we've referred to previously in Revelation 22, verse 12. It says, "And behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me to give every man according to his work shall be." But the word there, quick is essentially the word from where we get our word tachometer. And as we get closer and closer to the end, the RPMs, the acceleration that's evident on that tachometer, is going to increase. So when you're at the height of acceleration, you're going to usually be at higher RPMs, unless you're driving a Tesla. But if you're driving a Tesla, then you're one of the elite, and you can't relate to us anymore anyway. But the fact of the matter is that everything is accelerating. Everything is accelerating very quickly. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, it also says this, and now I see I have the wrong. There are certain versions that pop up on my Bible app, and if I use them, I will get a lot of hate mail. So I will go to the King James, which some people don't, a lot of people prefer. 2 Timothy 3, verse 1. This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. And then look at the description that 2 Timothy 3 gives and ask yourself, does this seem to indicate, does this sound like anybody that lives in the world today? For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. For of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with divers lusts, ever learning and never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. Now as Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses, so do these also resist the truth, men of corrupt minds, reprobate concerning the faith. But they shall proceed no further, for their folly shall be manifest unto all men, as theirs also was. And then he goes on to praise Timothy for knowing sound doctrine. I've posted some things on my Facebook page about the shack. And so if you're one of the people that wrote to me and said, I talk about it too much, then fast forward for about a minute, and then you can avoid this discussion. It has been one of the more troubling, the responses that I've gotten. There were a lot of people, when I first put it up, said, oh, thank you for sharing this, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then the people that love the shack came in. And the comments usually could be broken down into this. I learned, it's just a work of fiction, John. Get over it. It's just fiction. Then followed by, I felt so good when I heard it. It taught me so much about God. I learned so much about the Trinity. It helped me heal broken relationships. And so I know there are people out there in tremendous pain that I've never experienced. And I'm telling you, I'm standing here not to dismiss your pain or the need for you to deal with it. I'm standing here to tell you that the grace of God and the sufficiency of the Holy Scriptures is sufficient for you to get through your pain. It has happened over and over for 2 millennia of church history. We don't need a book with lousy theological garbage to get through those instances of pain. And so, listen, I am not dismissing your pain or the fact that you've had tremendous hurt. I understand that. My wife and I have had friends who've lost children. In one case, 3 children under the 5 or under in the space of 2 years. Those people were all able to get through that through the Word of God and the grace of God, and by the grace of God. I know women who have been sexually abused as young children. They got through that through the Word of God and by the grace of God. You don't need a book with lousy theology to do that. In fact, if you're Christian Smith, how many of you heard of Christian Smith? Not many, very likely. Christian Smith is a sociologist at Notre Dame. Now, look, I don't want to get into a discussion about Notre Dame, but I have an advanced degree in related field of sociology, so I understand research. He's done some great research in looking at modern Christianity. And what his conclusion is, I've played clips of us here in the class I used to teach over another church, and Christian Smith has coined a phrase that I think describes the state of modern evangelicalism better than any that I've heard. And that is, he has concluded that we are not, by and large, Christian. We have a new faith in the evangelical church, the professing evangelical church, that he has termed modern therapeutic deism. Because we're looking at healing our feelings and not dealing with our sin. Now, someone suggested this morning that maybe postmodern therapeutic deism might be a better term, and I think that's a pretty good term because of the type of world that we live in, where people are driven by their feelings. So today, as we go through this, I want you to look at some themes and how they're all connected. The rejection of sound doctrine, people being governed by their feelings, and people believing out-and-out lies and propagating those lies to the point where it's apparent they've lost the ability to reason. This is an article. So I'm going to go through a bunch of articles and some videos, and hopefully we'll be finished up at the usual time around 12:15. In Fast Company, the lead article there is the world's 50 most innovative companies, world's 50 most innovative companies. But within, it's interesting to me that all of a sudden it seems that in the left-leaning or business press, all of a sudden there are articles about faith and religion and how important they are. So this article is about fast-growing entrepreneurial Christianity is about a lot more than church attendance. This just came out the other day. And the article makes some good observations that Christianity is changing and it's diverging in a couple of directions. But they're the ones who describe it as fast-growing and entrepreneurial. So what are they picking up from the church culture that we ought to be worried about? That the church is more oriented towards this church growth movement than anything else. Big churches, cultural influence, cultural impact, that type of thing. You see it. I heard a panel of pastors on WSU on Wednesday or Thursday talking about immigration. And they went through and they said, oh, you know, all the Old Testament verses say that you have to welcome the stranger, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I didn't have time to call in because I was busy, but I would have called in and asked a question. So what, are you advocating that we establish a theocracy in this country? Okay, how about we go through the things about creation versus evolution? How about we do the thing and adopt that as public policy? How about we adopt a prohibition against same-sex marriage as public policy? But you see what they're doing, these pastors, including one of a very large church here, they're just adopting something that makes them feel good about themselves. And they're not really looking at the theology or how to apply Scripture. They're just sort of picking some from column A and column B and putting it out into their own little version of Christianity. In fact, there are verses in the Old Testament that castigated the Jews for bringing in the foreigners in Isaiah. It's all through Isaiah. And what happened? The Assyrians invaded and destroyed the northern kingdom and carried them away into captivity. So the term they use in this article in Fast Company is independent network charismatic, INC. So listen to what a couple things that they say. Our primary conclusion as they look at this is that the growth of these groups is largely the result of their network governance structure. When compared to the oversight and accountability of formal congregations and denominations, these structures allow for more experimentation. Listen, this is a tremendous insight to modern evangelicalism, because what happens in churches like New Spring Church down in South Carolina with Perry Noble, who had some failures and was fired by his church. But who was Perry Noble? Who was Perry Noble's board? Was it other elders within that church? No, he had people on his board like, Stephen Furtick. And you go to Stephen Furtick's church, and he has people like Perry Noble on his board. So you understand how they've got this network thing going? And so Fast Company, you talk to evangelicals, what I would put in the solid evangelical camp, and you talk to them about these structures and how this is undermining the church, and they look at you like, huh? It's like, what are you talking about? So a secular magazine oriented to business can come in and they can pick up on what's going on. But the frogs in the kettle, they don't understand that they're boiling. This includes extreme experiences of the supernatural, unorthodox beliefs and practices and financing, as well as marketing techniques that leverage the power of the internet. And they cite examples like Bethel Church in Reading, that in 2013, when they were still relatively new in terms of the internet, they achieved somewhere around $16 million in revenue at that church from selling seminars online and books and other things online. In addition to the growth numbers, the importance of INC Christianity lies in the fact that its proponents have a fundamentally different view of the relationship between the Christian faith and society than most Christian groups throughout American history. Most Christian groups in America have seen the role of the church in connecting individuals to God through the saving grace of Jesus and building congregations that provide communities of meaning and belonging through worship services. I hope Andy Stanley is listening to this, because he's one of the big proponents of this networking through this Catalyst conference. Willow Creek does it through their association, through their leadership summit. And it's all networking, and it's all to give the impression of all this activity and growth. And Fast Company, who I'm pretty sure was not a Christian author writing this, they can see right through it. But other people, when you criticize this, other people in the church say, why are you judging somebody else? It's so apparent that if you don't see it, you don't want to see it. Continue. They also believe in serving and providing for their needs of local communities. Social justice, bring in all the immigrants, get the money from the government for doing that, even though that might carry with it rules that don't allow you to proselytize. Such traditional Christian groups believe that, this is traditional groups. Such traditional Christian groups believe that although the world can be improved, it will not be restored to God's original plan until Jesus comes back again to rule the earth. That describes us, and to a large degree, at Fellowship Bible Chapel. But the INC beliefs is different. Their leaders are not content to simply connect individuals to God and grow congregations. Most INC Christian groups we studied seek to bring heaven or God's intended perfect society to earth by placing kingdom-minded people in powerful positions at the top of all sectors of society. It's kingdom now, dominionist theology. They have the 7 mountains. There are 7 mountains that we need to dominate as Christians. Here's a book by Bill Johnson and Lance Wallnau, part of the New Apostolic Reformation, this kingdom now theology, this we're going to build the kingdom. We're going to do such a good job that Jesus is coming back to take over what we've built. It hasn't happened in 2,000 years. And if the Lord would tarry, I can assure you it won't happen in another 2,000. The kingdom will come when the King gets here. He'll bring it, set it up to his glory. But they think arts and entertainment, business, education, family, government, media, and religion, those are the 7 mountains that we should dominate. They even on their website had one of the websites that promotes this 7 mountain, I think it's called 7 Mountain Mandate or 7mountains.org. They actually have a video there called Change Agent. Now, this has been a criticism of the church growth movement, that there are change agents that have infiltrated into good, solid denominations and fellowships to change what's being taught into something else. And people, when you confront people with this, what do? I never heard of a change agent. John, I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about? Go look at their stuff. Go look at Leadership Network. It's all through this. And if you don't see it, you're willfully blind. Here are some of the churches. Bethel Church up there, on earth as it is in heaven. That's on their website. Down here, Mike Bickle, IHOP, brags about all the hours that he gets people watching on the internet. His new book is called God's Answer to the Growing Crisis. Of course, you know the things about Joel Osteen. Another article in The Atlantic sort of builds on the same themes this week. And The Atlantic is a left-leaning magazine. But they talked about what's happening in Christian circles. Is that we know that, they said, we know that secularism has come on the scene. And secularism has brought with it a lot of things that a lot of us really like support for gay marriage and abortion and support for transgenders and all this other stuff. But those people that believe that have by and large left the church. And then they looked at the Trump phenomenon, and they said, look, a lot of people that supported Trump, they've left the church too, or the church has left them, and they're looking for something to grab onto. And so Peter Beinart in this article, and he's a man of the left, but I give him credit for recognizing the fact that as secularism has risen in culture and people have largely abandoned all faith traditions more and more, it's not resulted in a very nice society. We're more divided and more at war than ever. And a lot of people in National Review and Dennis Prager and stuff says we're really in a cold civil war right now in the United States. We are at each other's throats, more so even maybe than they were. The only thing difference from this in 1861 is we're not shooting at each other, ... yet. And you can see it. I saw an article this week where it says that lunchtime in D.C. now is protesting Trump. And people are getting very worn out because all weekend long they're out protesting Trump, and they're not. That's what they're doing. There's whole networks that are set up to do this. So there's a lot of criticism of Trump. This is the cover of Time this week. You know, he's knocking over the Washington Monument. This is a billboard at about 11th Avenue and Grand in Phoenix. And you can see it's a Trump with nuclear clouds and then dollar signs that look like swastikas. And the guy who put it up says, I'm leaving it up for his whole term. And then down here, round them up, Trump is getting the immigrants, and we can't support that. It's interesting as a battle over immigration has come about, and I think we need to make things clear. I don't think a lot of us don't support immigration. But unrestricted immigration will destroy the society and culture. Look at Europe. Do you think we're going to end up better than Europe? I got an email from somebody in Germany this week. I should read it. Essentially, he said this: it's not safe for anybody to go outside at night. There are no-go zones all over Germany. The police don't deal with the problem. Women are raped. If you describe somebody from a Muslim country as the perpetrator, they don't even take a report. They leave. They don't do anything about it. They mask the problem. They don't put in the background of the perpetrator in their statistics, so people can't get a real handle on it. But people instinctively know that listen, he described a Germany that's probably worse than anything that I've talked about here. And he just said, thanks that at least there's one church around that's talking about this stuff. And the point of it is, the old tachometer, I come quickly, it's accelerating rapidly all over the world. And I think it's out of control. Now, here's the mayor. There's these sanctuary cities all over. And so look, let them do what they want, cut off their funding, and let them deal with the issue. You want to take that issue, pay for your own self. And so here's the governor of Connecticut comes out and says, we're going to be, Governor Daniel P. Malloy issued a memo to schools and police departments about immigration enforcement. What he said, don't cooperate with the feds because we're a sanctuary state. So here's what I say. You want to take that position, don't expect funding from the federal government. And second, you're responsible. The blood of anyone is on your heads. And it wasn't 2 days later that this happened in Connecticut. 2 days after governor declares a Connecticut sanctuary state, an illegal alien murdered a mother and kidnapped a 6-year-old girl. So the blood of that little mother and girl is on the head of the governor of Connecticut. But in our culture, he'll never be held to account for that, because why? Well, he did good. He felt good when he did it. So that's the determination. And it's just wrong. And to me, it's part of this Bible prophecy thing, the lawlessness that we see in our culture and world. We know that there's coming a man of lawlessness. And I always ask the question is, when you see governors doing this, willfully ignoring the law, telling you that they're citizens of the United States, they're subject to the laws of the United States, I'm going to break federal law. Is it much of a stretch to know that in the future there will be a man come who's called the man of lawlessness? These guys are laying the foundation for this, okay? They think they're doing good. In reality, they're setting it up for that guy. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I want to make a point about acceleration. It was not 2 years ago that the Supreme Court issued the Obergefell decision. It came out at the end of May in 2015. Not even 2 years ago. Our culture was wrestling with whether same-sex marriage was a right of privacy, a constitutional right. And it was decided then. That was a watershed event. It changed the existing law and cultural norms that humanity had existed under since its inception. We know better than the way God set it up. And so, listen, whatever happens flows out of that, it's on their heads. It's on the head of the 5 justices on the Supreme Court that voted for this. It's on the heads of the politicians and groups that push for this. You don't get to rip society apart, in my view, and not be held accountable. But now in the network world, that's the way it works, it seems like, because you're not accountable to anybody. So this is the cover of the current Time magazine. And we've tracked this for a number of years, and I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but in less than 2 years from the Obergefell decision, this is where we are. Where are we going to be in 2 more years? And so this is beyond he or she. It says how a new generation is redefining the meaning of gender. And so on the left is one person. It takes practice, this person says. You don't even know anymore. I showed a picture. I couldn't show the picture because of the suggestive nature of it. But I think it was in an ad in Time magazine accompanying this article of 2 persons kissing. And so I showed it to my dear wife of almost 42 years. And I said, who's kissing who? Is it a boy and a girl, a boy and a boy, or a girl and a girl? And she said, you can't tell from the picture. You can't. It's intentionally blurring the lines. And so now you don't have just advocates for this, for tearing down society. Now advertising builds on it. Days of Lot. I'm not even sure Lot had to put up with this. I don't. Now, I don't know everything that was going on in Sodom, but I'm just telling you. So look at some of these quotes. No binary code. However they self-identify, young people tend to be more accepting of whatever identities they encounter. Do you think, folks, you really think it's just a very, very tiny minority of the population now? Do you think it's going to increase? I've seen things where 35% of people under the age of 25 have questions about their gender identity. This, come quickly, Lord, because I don't know that the fabric of society can withstand this. And there are many other things I'm going to talk about today that I think are also true. Another one, gender doesn't have to be defined in rigid terms. Your terms do not really reflect my reality or the reality of my friends. That's a professor of psychology, professor emeritus, which means what? He's an old guy at Cornell University. A person who identifies as queer and gender nonconforming says this: every different type of identity that exists should be supported. No lines, no moral judgments. Now, ask the question a second time. The Bible describes the coming, maybe in the very near future, of a man who is described as the son of perdition and the man of lawlessness. Is it a stretch to think that a man like that could rise to the top and try to take over, rule the world? No. The answer is, if you're a thinking person and you can, as they say, fog a mirror still, you should be able to say, no, it's not a stretch. We have, and then another one, director of transgender summer camp. We have a growing number of kids who identify in different ways. People put demigirl, genderless, no gender when they're filling out their camp application. So again, I don't want to beat a dead horse here because I've talked about it a lot. But to me, this is sort of like one of the penultimate examples of where we are on this Bible prophecy timeline. And it wasn't 2 years ago that the Supreme Court approved same-sex marriage. And so here we sit. What do we sit here? Less than 22 months later. And this is mainstream media stuff. This was at Claremont. They have a wall that you can put up what you think. And so this was what, white girl, take off your hoops. You know the big earrings that people wear? If you're a white girl, you're not allowed to do that because that really belongs to black culture. So the left has always said, we're going to get rid of discrimination. And so has the issue gotten better or worse as they've gotten more and more in charge? It's gotten worse. This is in the press. Press pool no longer just for the mainstream. What's happened is the Heritage Foundation has a news subsidiary called the Daily Signal. And these people have now been admitted and put into the White House press pool, and the mainstream media is going, wait a minute, the Heritage Foundation is a policy institute, and even though they've put up a firewall with regard to their media people, the press is going, we can't let these people in that they're biased. They have an agenda. Here's a quote from the article. While there were no objections to this, he was in the pool, and a small part of the White House press pool will go on different events. And so this guy named Lucas from the Daily Signal got into the press pool, and he reported about Pence. And it says this: while there were no objections to his reports on Pence, some journalists suggested the presence of the Signal as a member of the pool crossed a symbolic line into greater legitimacy for the partisan press. So I guess until this happened, the press was nonpartisan? Really? I mean, you see, the the reprobate minds on the left, they lose the ability to reason. They can't even, they don't even see themselves in a mirror. They don't. Of course, we had this meeting this week. And of course it was like, oh, he didn't shake her hand, and she got upset, and, she was very upset. Well, he shook her hand at the end of the news conference, but I want you to look at this little section of the news conference, and I want you to watch Angela Merkel. She's listening to the thing being translated through the headphones. So Trump is talking about what Germany and the United States can do, and Europe can do together.
Most importantly, our two countries must continue to work together to protect our people from radical Islamic terrorism and to defeat ISIS. I applaud Chancellor Merkel for Germany.
Let's look at this a little more closely.
From radical Islamic terrorism and to defeat ISIS.
You be the judge. Now, this is something, I'm going to say this at the risk of offending a lot of people. I have said here that there are some things that President Trump does that I like, and that, frankly, I have rather low expectations. I pray for him. I hope he does the right thing, because if he does the right thing, my life will be a little bit better and more comfortable. But I'm also about the truth, and when I see things that I'm concerned about, and Caroline Glick wrote a long article or two about it this week about knowing your enemy, I agree with her. I'm concerned about some of the people in the administration. And so here's one that just came out. Iran deal architect is now running Tehran policy at the State Department. She worked for Obama, and she was one of the people running the media stuff and getting support, drumming up support for the Iran nuclear deal, which is a disaster. Her name is Sahar Nowrouzadeh, Nowrouzzadeh. The Iran director for former President Obama's National Security Council has brought into the government under President Trump. She's now in charge of Iran and the Persian Gulf region on the policy planning staff at the State Department. Similarly, General McMaster at the National Security Council has held over some people that from the Obama administration that are very concerning. And reports I saw this morning were that he has read a book that came out about 2010 from which he gets the line, terrorism is not Islam. ISIS is not Islam. And they're in top security positions in the federal government. Now, there are other people that disagree with them, but I'm concerned about this. And then Caroline, in her article last week, she went back to what General Mattis had said, the now Secretary of Defense, 4 years ago at the Aspen Institute. And here's what he said about Israel and Palestine.
Is this Israeli-Palestinian peace process going anywhere?
Wolf, that'll depend on the protagonists, and do they want it as much as I think our valiant Secretary of State wants it and is doing everything possible. But I would tell you that the current situation is unsustainable. It's got to be directly addressed. We don't want to turn this over to our children, the same thing that you and I have lived with our entire adult lives. We have got to find a way to make the two-state solution that Democrat and Republican administrations have supported. We've got to get there, and the chances for it, as the King of Jordan has pointed out, are starting to ebb, because the settlements and where they're at are going to make it impossible to maintain the two-state option. For example, if I'm Jerusalem and I put 500 Jewish settlers out here somewhere to the east, and there's 10,000 Arab settlers in here, if we draw the border to include them, either it ceases to be a Jewish state, or you say the Arabs don't get to vote. Apartheid. That didn't work too well the last time I saw that practiced in a country. So we've got to work on this with a sense of urgency, and I paid a military security price every day as the commander of CENTCOM because the Americans were seen as biased in support of Israel, and that moderates all the moderate Arabs who want to be with us because they can't come out publicly in support of people who don't show respect for the Arab Palestinians. So he is right on target with what he's doing.
Okay. I want to, I'm going to call an audible here. I'm going to see if I can put this in very quickly. Okay. Hang on a sec. Please bear with me for just a moment. It is a video from a 1978 at Faneuil Hall in Boston. I've played this before. Let's see if this works.
As my first witness, Mr. Benjamin Natai.
Mr. Natai, welcome to the advocate.
Glad to be here. Mr. Natai is a
You recognize
graduate
who
of
that is?
MIT. He is an Israeli, and he is a man who has written widely on this question before the House tonight. Mr. Natai, is the issue of self-determination the core of the conflict in the Middle East?
No, I don't believe it is. The real core of the conflict is the unfortunate Arab refusal to accept the state of Israel.
Turn it up a little.
And I think, as was mentioned earlier, for 20 years the Arabs had both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And if self-determination were, as they now say, the core of the conflict, they could have easily established a Palestinian state then, but they didn't.
When did the issue arise then?
Well, for 20 years, we didn't hear a word about self-determination. And, in fact, what we did hear, those of us living in the Middle East, was about driving the Jews into the sea. Now, after 1967, under the leadership of the PLO, the hardline strategy shifted to adopting a moderate, dressed-up slogan, which now talked in terms of first a secular democratic state and then replaced it with Palestinian self-determination. But what this...
So his point is that he was about 28. 1978, he would have been about 27 or 28. And he had graduated from MIT. He's a bright guy. And he said, look, from 1947, 1948 to 1967, they had control of areas. Did they create a state at that time? Now, I just hope he goes back and watches himself and gets reacquainted with, make sure he knows very well the guy that he was when he was 28. But this two-state solution thing, so more in the U.S., there was this person who is associated with Grover Norquist, and he ended up in this, and he's a Muslim, and he ended up in a very sensitive position in the Department of Homeland Security. So, and in 2004, June 22nd, 2004, in Salon, they wrote an article about this guy. How secure is the Department of Homeland Security? Salon is a left-wing magazine. And they were saying, well, wait a minute, there's a Muslim guy sympathizer in Homeland Security. And this guy's associated with Grover Norquist, who's big on economic issues, but is very blind about either willfully or ignorantly, I don't think it makes any difference, to the Muslim Brotherhood influence in the country. And his pack, if you criticize him, he'll take you down. He'll spend money against you. And so now this guy is now head of the Democratic Party in Vermont, where Bernie Sanders comes from. Now, do you think Salon's going to write an article about him this time about, well, we shouldn't have this guy taking over our party. This is a story, I don't have time to go into it. You remember the infamous Carlos the Jackal? You see the picture of him there by the typewriter. He was, for a time, he was the most wanted criminal on planet Earth. He was born in Venezuela. He, by his own admission, has murdered, although he says, I love people. He has murdered at least 80 people by his own admission. And injured in bombings and whatnot, dozens of others. That's what he'll cop to. He's on trial right now in France this week for a grenade attack that took place in 1974. And he says it's unjust. You shouldn't go after me. He says, in an interview this week, he said, no one in the Palestinian resistance has executed more people than I have. Well, wait a minute, he's not even Palestinian. He's from Venezuela, but he's a communist. But I am the only one who survived. In all fights, there are collateral victims, unfortunately. He claimed personal responsibility for 80 deaths and 1,500 for his organization. I love people. I'm a good person. I don't like violence. Okay, now this is a postmodern guy on steroids, but listen, this is where you have to read very carefully in these to find out connections. Because what's one of the questions that a lot of people have now? Why are the leftist women bowing down and saying Muslim prayers? And how are they connected in any way? So this is from Fred Burton. He wrote a book about this, Out of the Shadow, or Chasing Shadows, to find out who killed an Israeli guy in a knife attack in Maryland about 1973. They eventually destroyed all the evidence, but Fred went back, interviewed people, talked to Carlos the Jackal's wife, and thinks he figured out who it was that murdered this Israeli officer. It was in part of the diplomatic mission here in the United States. I mean, we forget about these things after time. But look at the Venezuelan-born Carlos, one of the most wanted criminals of the 70s and 80s, is already serving 2 life sentences in France for a series of murders and assaults he perpetrated or plotted in the country on behalf of the Palestinian cause or communist revolution. And so you have to look very carefully to find the web of ties. That's why I titled it the thing this week, The Web of Ties. And so Burton, he actually got back a signed copy of he gave a book to Carlos in prison, and he got a signed copy back from Carlos, and there's the picture of it. Now, you heard General Mattis talk about what is going on in Israel amounts to apartheid. And this week, the United Nations ESCWA issued a report that was titled Israeli Practices Towards the Palestinian People and the Question of Apartheid. Now, the head of the UN, to his credit, refused to put it up, not so much for its content, but because they didn't get his approval first. You know, he's a politician. He's very clever about not getting. So Rima Khalif, a Jordanian who served as executive secretary of the Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, ESCWA, announced her resignation at a hastily arranged press conference in Beirut. She said UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' insistence that the document be removed from the agency's website, had her quit. I was able to pull off a copy of this thing, and the head of the UN said, we expected, of course, that Israel and its allies would put this is what she said, I'm sorry. We expected, of course, that Israel and its allies, of course, Israel's in control of everything, would put huge pressure on the Secretary General of the UN so they would disavow the report and that they would ask him to withdraw it, who had also served as an Undersecretary General to Guterres. Nikki Haley said the United States is outraged by the report, and I think it was because of her pressure of the Trump administration that the thing got pulled from the website. For some reason, I was able to get a copy of it. The report's authors conclude that Israel has established an apartheid regime that systematically institutionalizes racial oppression and domination of the Palestinian people as a whole. And by the way, pray for friends of ours in South Africa. It's become very unsafe as whites are being murdered in great numbers. I mean, I've seen pictures on the internet, a white woman murdered in a church, cross driven through her mouth, and nails all through her body. And this is going on. Thousands of ranchers that are white have been murdered, and many more raped and killed and driven out of South Africa. So it's just something you don't hear about. And I know people that live there, even people that are sort of associated with our church, and they're very concerned about the situation. So pray about that. That's apartheid, or the results of apartheid. And, you know, I think apartheid was wrong. I mean, that's just, okay? But so is killing people just because they're one race or the other. That's just nonsense. But to say that Israel's doing this is just absolute nonsense. Here's the executive summary. It's titled Palestine and the Israeli Occupation, Issue Number 1, Israel Practices Towards the Palestinian People and the Question of Apartheid. They go through, you can find it on, just Google it. Listen to what they concluded. This report establishes on the basis of scholarly inquiry and overwhelming evidence that Israel is guilty of the crime of apartheid. However, only a ruling by an international tribunal in that sense would make such an assessment truly authoritative. The authors therefore urge the United Nations to implement this finding by fulfilling its international responsibilities in relation to international law and the rights of the Palestinian people as a matter of urgency for two reasons. First, the situation addressed in the report is ongoing. It goes on to give secondly, the extreme gravity of the charge requires prompt action. Since the 1970s, when the international campaign to oppose apartheid in Southern Africa gained momentum, apartheid has been considered in the annals of the United Nations and world public opinion to be second only to genocide in the hierarchy of criminality. This report accordingly recommends that the international community act immediately without waiting for a more formal pronouncement regarding the culpability of the State of Israel, its government, and its officials for the commission of the crime of apartheid. While urging swift action to oppose and end this apartheid regime, the authors of this report urge as a matter of highest priority that the authoritative bodies to be requested to review its findings, Opinions of the General Assembly, ICJ, the International Court of Justice, and the International Criminal Court are especially crucial, although assessments by national courts would also be relevant to interpreting international criminal law and appraising its implementation by member states. In other words, either Israel kowtows to us or we're going to force them out of existence. And they'll be criminals. We've talked a while back, I don't have time to go into it, we talked about this covenant confirmed in Daniel 9:27. What is it? What does it look like? My suggestion at that time was that maybe we should rethink and have a discussion about whether it's a 7-year-long peace treaty. Maybe it's something else. And maybe it's not a peace treaty. Maybe it's something that's shoved down the throats of Israel. Now, Israel will react. I think the reaction would be to clean up the West Bank in rather dramatic fashion. And I think Pastor Mike might be talking about that this hour, last week and this week. So you might want to watch his talks. And they would say, we're taking over and we're going to build our temple and whatnot, whether you want it or not. That's a possibility. We have to think through these things because the world's certainly changed. So, and this is a group saying they're opposed to Gorsuch. Okay, so now I'm going to shift to immigration in the United States and the court ruling in Hawaii very quickly. I'm going to tell you right now. I know I'm going to go until 12:30. I apologize to the people I have to shut down, but I got to get through this today to tie it all together. If you have to leave, go get your kids, and you can watch it online. I apologize, but I just got to get through this. There's the courts in San Francisco and elsewhere are upset that immigrations and customs enforcement agents are coming to court and arresting people that are charged with illegal immigration. They don't want them in there. They don't want to cooperate. The people who enforce the law don't want to cooperate with the law. It's chaos. So now the decision in the state of Hawaii and Ismail el-Ashiki, who is a Muslim, versus Donald Trump. In Hawaii, a nationwide TRO was issued on Friday or Thursday. 43-page decision. It is a decision that is remarkable for its lack of reasoning and intelligence. I hope nobody ever asks me to go to Hawaii to be in front of this judge because I'm toast. Although I would be willing to go, really. Really. I might be able to take my golf clubs on that trip, since I take them on almost every trip that I go on now. Anyway, he granted this. Here's what he said in his decision. Like his children, and you want to see the feelings, the postmodern therapeutic deism that now is infecting the court's decisions? Like his children, Dr. Elishki is deeply saddened by the message that conveyed that a broad travel ban is needed to prevent people from certain Muslim countries from entering the United States. In his findings, he said this: when signing the first executive order, President Trump read the title, looked up, and said, "We all know what that means." President Trump said he was establishing a new vetting measure to keep radical Islamic terrorists out of the United States of America, and that we don't want them here. That is what the president is constitutionally charged to do under the Constitution and by statutes that have been acted by Congress, and this judge has no authority to do it. Now, I think it'll be overturned, but Ninth Circuit, you have better odds, I think, with getting something like this overturned in the Ninth Circuit than you do picking the right, one of the right, I don't know how many, 35 numbers on a roulette wheel. Your odds are pretty slim that you're going to pick the right one. The court turns to whether plaintiffs sufficiently established a likelihood of success on the merits of their count one claim that the executive order violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Because a reasonable objective observer, enlightened by the specific historical context, contemporaneous public statements, and specific language, specific sequence of events leading to its issuance, will conclude that the executive order was issued with a purpose to disfavor a particular religion. And so when he issued the decision, I want to dispel any notion. I think you might think that the plaintiff might have said this, but I'm not sure that the plaintiff shouted Aloha Akbar when the decision was issued. You're not allowed to tape in federal courts, so I don't know. I'm just saying, I think the decision should be known by that name. Even the Atlantic came out and said, dangerous precedent set. David Froome, who's a man of the left, said this is crazy what this judge did. It's just not right. He concluded the dangerous precedent, he says, frankly, under any other president than Donald Trump, it seems impossible that a federal judge would have expressed such certitude or granted their requested order. Even he can see it. The federal courts have historically granted large deference to presidential power over immigration and naturalization. The Supreme Court ruled as recently as 2015 that the president could deny a visa for an alien for no reason at all. Why then did Watson accept the far-fetched argument that aliens can acquire First Amendment rights at second hand? Because they said this guy's a Muslim and his family is Muslim, so therefore the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which says Congress will make no law establishing a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, that the person in the foreign country now has a right to make a claim under the First Amendment. This is absolute, complete, judicial, legal garbage that this guy wrote. It is imbecilic, I guess I don't know if there's a word on this. Well, yeah, but I don't know. Is an idiot smarter than an imbecile? I don't know. Watson candidly confessed that he was swayed by the avowals by the president and senior aides that their motives were indeed based on irrational religious administration. Tucker Carlson went into this with a person from the National Immigration Institute. even though they said Ireland's prime minister bashed it. The organizations behind this are funded by Soros. Okay? It's pretty clear. The ACLU, the National Immigration Law Center. And so here's part of an interview. I don't have time to play all of it. You can find it on foxnews.com. Go to the video section and look up Tucker Carlson. He asked questions. I think this one will sort of encapsulate it. I want you to listen to the terminology that she uses to get what it's tied to.
But let's get to what you just said, the reasoning behind this decision. Now, I'm reading, this is the Hawaii decision. It says that the executive order was issued with a purpose to disfavor a particular religion in spite of its stated religiously neutral purpose. In other words, we're inferring the motive of the people who wrote it based on, I don't know, news stories, clairvoyance, our own deep insight into human nature. How exactly would they know that? I mean, that's kind of a reach, no?
Not at all. I mean, unfortunately, the truth is that there is an incredibly long trail of evidence from the president himself. When he was a candidate, when he was campaigning, he pledged that one of the key things he would do as president was to enact a far-reaching Muslim ban. And the courts have looked at all of this evidence on the campaign trail, in the executive order itself, statements made by the drafters afterwards, statements made by the president, and said this is the highly unique case where we can tell, and it's clear under the law, that this intent here was to disparage Islam and to ban Muslims.
It's just hilarious that they somehow know. I mean, first of all, this is not a far-reaching Muslim ban, as you know. It applies to 6 countries that do not constitute the majority or even close of Muslims around the world, but that they can know what's in the heart of the person who wrote it. I'm not sure that's a precedent we want to run with for future decisions.
Okay, but did you hear what her terminology was? An order that disparages another religion. And this is the operative term. This is the tie that shows. Now, The Atlantic also has in their new issue a article about the rise of robo-lawyers. In other words, machines and artificial intelligence are going to take over what people that like I do. And you know what? Machines have already taken over that person. She went to she went to Brown University, graduated in 1996. She got a master's in public policy from Berkeley in 2000. Then she went to Berkeley Law School. Do you think it's possible that she's been educated in ways that lean towards the left end of the political spectrum? Unless she has the full armor of you-know-what in place, yeah, she has. And she spouts things that are absolute, complete nonsense in this interview. And I would say she's one of the first examples of the robo-lawyer that we're going to see. At Counter Jihad, they have a question about this. Claire Lopez, they published an article from Claire Lopez from the Center for Security Policy. And Claire says that she went to a thing in late September last year in Poland that was about how we're going to deal with this. And she said, look, there's an Islamophobia industry in place. And the Islamophobia industry are people that are trying to shut down any criticism or anything at all with respect to Islam. And they're succeeding in large regard. Stephen Coughlin, who is also, remember, he was the one who had the PowerPoint that talked about Muslim Brotherhood and stuff, and his PowerPoints got scrubbed and removed from websites that were instructing people on how to deal with this problem in our government. And he said this is a direct extraterritorial demand that non-Muslim, talking about Resolution 1618 from the UN, that was supported by Hillary Clinton. This is a direct extraterritorial, which says you can't, it's called the Islamic Blasphemy Resolution. It says all religions, but the Muslim countries wanted it to be applicable. You cannot criticize or say anything negative about Islam. And that's how it's going to be applied, mark my words, because that's how people have been trained. And so Stephen Coughlin, bless his heart, said this is a direct extraterritorial demand that non-Muslim jurisdictions submit to Islamic law and implement Sharia-based punishment over time. In other words, the OIC is set on making it an enforceable crime for non-Muslim people anywhere in the world, including the United States, to say anything about Islam that Islam does not permit. And the organization OIC is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It has 57 states, by the way. I remember a presidential candidate saying he'd been to all 57 states. I am not implying, please, that there's a connection between those 57 and the 57, and you're free to draw your own conclusions. So, and here's from the State Department, Mission of the United States in Geneva, Switzerland. U.S. report on the first meeting of experts to promote implementation of HCR Resolution 1618. At the invitation of Secretary of State, this is from 2012, March 2011, says this. At the invitation of Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, representatives of 26 governments and 4 international organizations met in Washington, D.C. on December 12-14, 2011 to discuss the implementation of United States Human Rights Council Resolution 1618 on combating intolerance, negative stereotyping, and stigmatization of discrimination. In her closing remarks, Secretary Clinton stressed, the United Nations is hosting this conference because religious freedom and freedom of expression are among our highest values. That's why we're hosting a conference, to undermine those values. That's my addition. Quote, they are enshrined in our Constitution for people everywhere. Faith and religious practice is a central source of our identity. It provides lives with meaning and context that is fundamental to who we are. Now, let's turn to the Middle East. So there's a connection there, folks. This is all the left and these other people are all tied together. And you want to call me an Islamophobe? I'm a realist. I have to deal with the facts. And the facts are we have a problem. And so Netanyahu a week ago said 80% of security threats come from Iran. He cited the bombing in Buenos Aires of the Israeli embassy or mission there back in I think it was in the 1990s. And he said, Iran initiated Iran plan, and Iran, through its henchman Hezbollah, also executed that attack. He then went to Russia, and he used the same argument. It was Purim, and he said, we've had trouble with Persia for thousands of years. And Putin kind of got back in his face and said, Netanyahu said Persia made an attempt to destroy the Jewish people that did not succeed 2,500 years ago. He also talked about this when he spoke at Congress a couple of years ago. Hard to believe that's been long. It was almost exactly 2 years ago. And in fact, I think it was on the eve of Purim when he spoke. Adopting a conciliatory tone, which I didn't know Putin had, but Putin said that the events described by Netanyahu had taken place in the 5th century BC. We now live in a different world. Let us talk about that now, Putin said. So it was sort of I think, dismissive. And Netanyahu pushed back and said they put this on their missiles, and it went on. So I have to skip over some of this. Hang on a minute. Anti-Semitism rises in our country. This is from the University of Illinois in Chicago. You see this poster that was put up? Ending white privilege starts with ending Jewish privilege. Because the Jews are elite and they're in control of the world. This is one of the lies of a lot of people that don't believe the Jews have anything. There's a Gaza war report. I'll have to talk about that in the future. Trump sent an envoy over there, Jason Greenblatt, and people are kind of stunned. He's kind of reaching out to both sides. And Caroline's been critical of this, like asking the question, does Trump really understand the nature of the PLO as an enemy? And so maybe he does, and maybe he's playing off both sides to try to get something done. I don't know. We'll have to see how it unfolds. He's only been in office a short time, so I would say be patient, but I'm concerned about some of the people and things that they've said in the past and things that they've read and things that, from reading books that aren't so good, that have kind of gotten into their talk, like Mattis and McMaster. Here's a gal from Rebel Media. Here's what she says about her trip to Israel.
You know, we've been on the ground here in Israel for the past several days, and I've seen a lot. And frankly, this has been one big myth-busting trip. I came here with an open mind, and I thought, I'm open to see anything, to hear from everyone. We've heard a lot of different opinions, do not get me wrong. We've talked to Palestinians, we've talked to pollsters, we've talked to Israeli members of the Knesset, we've talked to journalists, we've talked to people from the right, left, pro-Palestinian, pro-Israel, two-state solution, one-state solution. Hell, there is no solution. Let me tell you some of the things that we found out while we were here. The security wall, it's not a wall. It's a giant fence. Only about 5% of it is a wall. We found that Palestinians can actually freely come into Israel so long as they're not carrying any pipe bombs or explosive vests. They have to go through the sort of security that's akin to essentially going through an airport. You know who can't go the other way? Yeah, it's actually the Jews. It's actually Israelis. They can't go into Zone A. They can't go into the Palestinian, one part of the West Bank. That's according to essentially self-prohibition, but also because they know that if they go in there, there's a very good chance they will die. I'm a Christian. I really would have liked to see Bethlehem while I was here, where my Lord and Savior was born. Can't. There's a giant minaret there right now. And actually there are posters all over the place of suicide bombers who are essentially exalted by the populace around now Muslim-controlled Palestinian Bethlehem.
So she goes on. You can find that video on YouTube. And kind of a different thing than you would expect. That you don't usually see that from somebody in the media. So she makes some good points. But don't. If you go to her video, find it on YouTube, don't look at the comments because they're pornographic about what people that disagree with her want to do with her. Okay? It's unbelievable. Israel, this is a credible thing that's happening. Israel fired a missile or did an attack on some installations, probably Hezbollah, advanced weapons going to Hezbollah. In a different thing than has not happened before, Syria fired an anti-aircraft missile back. It was intercepted by the Arrow battery. Putin has summoned the Israeli envoy to come in and explain why they did the Syrian airstrike. Things are very tense. There's all this stuff going on the border of the Golan where she was filming her talk. The whole situation is very volatile. So, okay. This is an interesting article in The Economist. There's a lot of controversy in the Protestant community. Joel Richardson and others claim it's an Islamic Antichrist. Some say it's got to be from Europe. Others maybe put in Europe in the West or America. I think it's probably a combination of all three. So I don't dismiss Joel Richardson's points out of hand. I found this article to be very interesting in terms of the development of the Islamic side of that final ruler, because he'll appeal to everybody. Okay, and people may think he's a Muslim. I'm not. I have good friends who say that in the Ezekiel 38 war, Islam is destroyed and it's never a problem after that. It says that 5/6 of its army is destroyed on the mountains of northern Israel. There are, I have a chart that shows that by 2050, Islam and Christianity are equal 50-50 in the world. Now, again, I'm not saying that we're going to be here in 2050. Okay, understand that? I am not saying we're going to be here in 2050. I don't know. What I'm saying is those projections, that's where the lines cross. But I think it happens much sooner because of the acceleration of everything and the way this is going. But the interesting thing is this article about the destruction of Mecca, which is the most holy site for Islam. The Middle East's largest building project has faced 1,400 years of Islamic history. And it goes back and it looks at the history of the Grand Mosque, which has been expanded. I mean, they spent billions and billions and billions of dollars expanding this thing. When that crane collapsed, it was the largest construction collapse and killed several hundred people just before the Hajj a couple of years ago. Last year, when about 3,000 people got killed in a stampede at the Hajj, it was the largest construction crane on the planet, I believe. And it blew over in a storm, fell through the roof, and So they look at the historical thing. This is the Kaaba back in the 1880s, if I believe correctly. And one of the things that you notice around the Kaaba is you see 4 pavilions. You see that in the circle there? And even up into the 50s and 60s, those pavilions were still there. What those pavilions were pulpits for the different schools of Islam, of Sunni Islam. There are 4 schools, one of which has risen up and come to dominate in Saudi Arabia, which has the money, called Wahhabism. And we know that that's where Al-Qaeda came from, and their schools, their mosques, the Saudi prince was, Deputy Crown Prince was at the White House just the other day. They're building mosques all over the country. They're Wahhabist mosques. They're radical Islamic mosques. We need to be honest about this so we can deal with the problem. So there used to be 4 pulpits there, and people could go and listen to their school. But what the Saudis have done is there's now 1 pulpit, and it's a Wahhabist pulpit, because they're trying to educate the millions of people that come to the Hajj. And so there has been this massive reconstruction of Mecca that's been going on. And what they're doing is they're going in and they're sort of erasing a lot of the history. I mean, they're just bulldozing buildings where early caliphs and early imams lived that people used to go and visit. So like we would go to see George Washington's home at Mount Vernon. They would go to Mecca to see where these people lived that succeeded Muhammad when he died. And by the way, he's still dead. I've read that. But the purpose of what Saudi Arabia is doing is, what I want you to see, the connection that's kind of subtle in this article, is the connection between the emphasis of the one religious school at Saudi Arabia at the same time that there is a commercial aspect to this, because the Saudis believe that they will be able to promote tourism to the extent that come to Mecca by Muslims. They come in through the airport in Jeddah, and then it's about 40 miles or so over to Mecca, that the revenues from the tourism industry that they are envisioning and the hotels that are being built. This is right now, I believe, the 3rd tallest building on planet Earth, the Royal Clock Tower in Mecca. The largest shopping mall in the world is in that tower. It's like 20, 25 stories of a shopping mall. There are hotels, some of the largest hotels on the planet are in there. And so their goal, they believe that the revenues that they'll get from tourism will approach the oil revenues that they get from oil. Now, I say that because if this Islamic thing is an aspect of this final beast empire in some fashion, you see the melding of the religious and the commercial happening right in front of your eyes. That's the takeaway from there. That's the tie. That's the link. And so it's a very important article. And the interesting thing is, once this all gets built out, they're building a big building in Jeddah that 3 of the tallest buildings on planet Earth, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai is right now the tallest building on the planet, 2,500 feet. If you remember the Sears Tower, whatever they call it now, in Chicago is about 1,400 feet. This is 1,000 feet, roughly 100 stories taller in Dubai. Then you have this Royal Clock Tower, which is certainly over 100 stories, and I believe it's about 1,800 or 1,900 feet tall when you go all the way up to the crescent moon at the top. And under construction right now in Jeddah, 40 miles away, is the Jeddah Tower, part of the King Abdullah economic zone of Jeddah, which will be the tallest building on the planet. And by most estimates, it will be in excess of 1 kilometer high. Nobody's really saying. They believe it will be anywhere from 500 to 1,000 feet taller than the one in Dubai, in the Arabian Peninsula. So I just want you to see that this beast empire is coming, and there's this connection You can see that in Revelation between the commercial and the religious. And so if it's on the Islamic side, or that's part of it, I'm telling you that all that stuff is being put in place right now in front of our eyes. That's the tie that you need to see. Foreign Policy has this article about the making of Islamophobia, Inc. A well-funded network is trying to strip the right to speak away from American Muslims and fanning the politics of fear. I have not seen anybody say to ban Muslim speech. Have you? No, I'm just talking Frank, and they cite Frank Gaffney and Claire Lopez. I'll tell you what, if you can go to the Foreign Policy website, look up the making of Islamophobia, Inc., read the article. Everybody that they criticize, that's who you should go follow and understand what they're saying. Okay? Because that's where you're going to get the truth. Okay. This Islamic problem in China among the Uyghurs, understand that China has 1.4 billion people roughly. About 300 million of them live along the coast in China, in the eastern part of China, and participate in the economic growth and everything, and all the big buildings and cities and all this, and cars and all this. There are over 1 billion people in China that are desperately poor as many of the poorest people on planet Earth. A lot of them are Muslim. And now China is acknowledging that it has an ISIS and Islamic problem within its billion, the Uyghurs that live in Western China. So these are things that you need to watch out for. I have one more thing I want to talk about. I have 3 more things I want to talk about. Okay. Turkey. You should know Turkey is pushing its agenda around the world. There are a bunch of Turks in the Netherlands. They had, the Turks were rioting in the Netherlands, and they wanted to protest. They wanted to have a rally in support of a referendum that's coming up in April that'll make Erdogan the absolute, complete, total ruler of Turkey. And so these Turks, who the people in the Netherlands thought were pretty well integrated, I mean, they come here, they live here, they're integrated. Why are they different? You know that 50%, they're roughly 10% of the population. 50% of welfare payments in Netherlands go to the Turkish Islamic population that has immigrated. That number's not sustainable. And they thought they were integrated. Now they're protesting in favor of Erdogan, and Netherlands is saying maybe we have a problem. Here's the take on Europe and Netherlands. Throughout human history, it has been traditional that invading armies pay their own transportation and then support themselves as they get their support from their back lines when they invade a country. Europe has flipped that upside down. They not only transport them to the front lines, but they pay them when they get there. That is a level of insanity that's sort of hard to describe rationally, because there is no rationale behind it. So Gilders, he didn't do as well in his, this is protest in either Rotterdam or The Hague this week. They thought Wilders would do well. He didn't do that well. He did get he won't be part of the coalition likely because people think he's a racist and all this other stuff. But it did push Dutch politics towards the right, and they're going to put on some immigration controls and stuff like that. But it may be, and this is from the New York Times, Dutch consider new relationship to Muslims, but it may be too late. In the same time that Turkey's pushing this thing in Europe to get people to rally in its support, back in October, this came out, Turkey's new maps are reclaiming the Ottoman Empire. An interesting article in Foreign Policy about that, because Turkey is an end-time player. There's just no doubt about that. And Erdogan's trying to put in this, and so Erdogan put out a new map of Turkey. And when you look at this map of Turkey, you see that Turkey usually ends up has a little bit. This is the border of Turkey, right along there, and Syria and Iraq. But now this is what Erdogan says we should have gotten in the Treaty of Lausanne. We needed more countries. So they said that Erbil and Mosul and Aleppo and Kirkuk, those really should be under control of Turkey. So you see Turkey trying to expand its country and its influence, and I think that's prophetic. Next week, I will cover a very interesting topic about the global brain. There was a conference recently in Barcelona. If you want to look at some of the videos in advance, the singularity thing and the growth of intelligence and artificial intelligence thing is just a stunning thing to watch. It's happening so fast. It's going rapidly. And they had a conference called the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. And one of the things they talked about there was the global brain. And they had all these people present. They're involved in the mobile industry, and how this is going to change. They're going to be 5G. That'll be 1 gigabyte download, upload speed, available almost everywhere in the world through satellites and whatnot. They're putting the infrastructure in place. Cell phone companies are getting rid of their towers because they're going to do it a different way through low orbiting satellites to increase bandwidth. It's a stunning thing. The one guy did a talk. He talked about if you're really smart, average IQ is 100. Really smart, Da Vinci and Einstein would have been 190 for Einstein, Da Vinci 205 estimated. So if you're up in that range, you're a genius. But there aren't, as you can see, it's a bell curve. There aren't that many of them. But what he said is what they're trying to do is they're trying to change this so that even if a person has an IQ of 100, with the use of artificial intelligence and what you'll be able to get in your cell phone because of the increasing speed of everything, your IQ effectively will be 10,000. Okay, don't have time to go into it. This is like a whole day seminar. Sometimes when somebody wants to invite me to a seminar that I can prepare, I'll talk about it next week. But listen, we know that in Genesis 11, God destroyed the Tower of Babel because of what men was done, and he said, nothing will be impossible for them. Since that destruction of Babel, all the way through human history, now we have the technology, the political will, the capital to effectively rebuild Babel. This is stunning development. Come next Sunday, watch next Sunday. I'll try. Like I said, I'll do it. This is a stunning development, folks, in Bible prophecy. Essentially, if you listen to these talks, we know that in Genesis, God created man. And immediately Satan entered the picture and said, oh, did God really say that? Now we come all the way to the end. We know this beast empire is rising. We know the mark of the beast, the technology, the religious aspect of it that will be, the worship that will be required. And you hear these guys talk at the Mobile World Congress as to how quickly this is coming together, the Internet of Things, and what you come to the conclusion is man is now trying to create God. This will be an important thing that I talk about. And I'll show you the videos of these guys. If you want to look at them, mobileworldlive.com, mobileworldlive.com. It's stunning. So I apologize for going over. Bless your hearts for staying. If some of you can stay and help us clean up, that would be helpful. But I had to get through some of this. So let's pray and let's go. Father, Lord, you, for whatever reason, have placed us to live in times that were prophesied long ago. I pray that you will help give us wisdom and understanding to grasp the significance of the things that are going on around us, not to be afraid, but to use it to stand for the truth in this time as light in the darkness. Give us that strength. Empower us with your Spirit. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.